Snitching in the mob world isn't just betrayal, it's a death sentence. What made one of the most feared men in organized crime break the code of silence? And what happened to him after he turned on his family? This is the true, dark story of Sammy the Bull Gravano. In the world of the Mafia, betrayal isn't a word, it's a bullet. For a man like Sammy Gravano, it wasn't just loyalty that was expected, it was everything. The Mafia's sacred omerta, the code of silence, was his Bible, and for years, Gravano lived by it. He had carved out a violent, bloody path to become the underboss of the infamous Gambino crime family under the notorious Teflon Don, John Gotti. Together, they were untouchable, or so it seemed. But all kingdoms fall, and when Gravano's world started to crumble, he faced an unthinkable choice: stick to the code and rot in prison for life, or turn his back on everything he ever believed in, even if it meant putting a target on his own head. This is the twisted tale of what happened to Sammy Gravano after he snitched. The rise and reign of the Bull, a blood-stained path to power. Sammy Gravano wasn't just another street thug. He was a man who knew how to play the long game in a world that demanded ruthless efficiency. Born into a world of crime, Gravano quickly rose through the Mafia ranks. His loyalty, intelligence, and penchant for violence earned him Gotti's trust, and under Gotti's shadow, he thrived. For years, Gravano was the architect of Gotti's violent empire. He orchestrated murders, rigged construction deals, and even intimidated jurors. His role as Gotti's enforcer made him feared, respected, and untouchable. But as they say in the underworld, the higher you rise, the harder you fall. Gravano's world was about to unravel. The cracks in the empire, when loyalty became a one-way street. Sammy Gravano had been loyal to Gotti for years, sacrificing everything to protect the boss. But what happens when the man you die for demands you take the fall for him? It was 1990 when the walls finally closed in. The FBI had been building a case for years, and they finally had Gotti and Gravano where they wanted them, on trial with mountains of evidence and a courtroom full of witnesses ready to take them down. But Gotti, the self-proclaimed Teflon Don, wasn't willing to face the music. Instead, he turned to Gravano, his most loyal soldier, and asked him to take the blame for everything. This was the moment that shattered Gravano's world. After years of bloodshed, of risking everything for Gotti, the man he called his brother was ready to throw him to the wolves. For Gravano, this wasn't just a betrayal, it was an unforgivable act of cowardice. Gotti was supposed to be untouchable, the man who never backed down. But here he was, hiding behind the very man who had built his empire. The decision to flip, betrayal, cut both ways. Gravano was no fool. He had always known that the Mafia was a dangerous game. But until that moment, he had believed in loyalty. Now it was clear, loyalty was a one-way street, and he was standing on the wrong side. Gotti had broken the code long before Gravano did, and that made Gravano's decision to cooperate with the FBI a little easier. But it wasn't just Gotti that he turned his back on. It was the entire Mafia. And in the mob world, there's no worse crime than betrayal. In October of 1991, Sammy the Bull Gravano flipped, and the fallout was catastrophic. His testimony against Gotti and the Gambino family ripped through the underworld like a bomb. Gravano wasn't just a small-time player. He had been the mastermind behind dozens of murders, including some of the Mafia's most infamous hits. And now, he was handing all that information over to the government. But as he sat in that courtroom revealing the dark secrets of his past, one question haunted him. Was it worth it? Life after snitching. Hunted, hated, and haunted. The moment Gravano turned on the Mafia, he knew his life would never be the same. He had signed his own death warrant. To the Mafia, he wasn't just a rat, he was the ultimate traitor. And for that, there was only one punishment. After his testimony, Gravano entered the federal witness protection program. He adopted a new name, a new life, and tried to disappear. But for a man who had lived his life in the shadows of power and violence, anonymity didn't suit him. After just 8 months, he walked away from protection. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe it was restlessness. But Gravano believed he could live openly, even as the Mafia hunted him. He moved to Phoenix, Arizona, under the alias Jimmy Moran. He tried to go legitimate, opening a swimming pool company and staying out of the headlines. But Gravano was a man built for crime, and it wasn't long before he found himself back in the underworld. The relapse, from underboss to drug kingpin. You can leave the Mafia, but the Mafia never really leaves you. Despite his attempts to live clean, by the late 1990s, Gravano was back in the game. Only this time, it wasn't about construction rackets or hits. It was drugs. Ecstasy, to be exact. With his son Gerard by his side, Gravano built a massive drug empire that spanned states, selling over 30,000 pills a week and raking in millions. But Gravano wasn't the only one watching the rise of his drug operation. The FBI had eyes on him too, and in 2000 they swooped in. Gravano was arrested alongside nearly 40 other members of his organization, and the charges were severe: drug trafficking, money laundering, and more. He pled guilty, earning himself a 20-year sentence. This time, there was no witness protection, no deals. Just cold, hard time in one of the country's most brutal prisons, ADX Florence, where the worst of the worst go to rot. Prison and the fight for redemption. Sitting in solitary confinement in one of the most notorious prisons in the world, Gravano had plenty of time to reflect on his life. And for the first time, he seemed to realize what he had lost. In 2017, after nearly 2 decades behind bars, Sammy Gravano was released from prison. But the world he returned to wasn't the one he had left. The Mafia's power had been shattered, largely thanks to his testimony. Gotti was long dead, and many of the old crime families had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. Gravano, now in his 70s, began to rebuild his life. But instead of returning to crime, he found an unexpected platform: social media. Today, Sammy the Bull Gravano has a popular podcast, Our Thing with Sammy the Bull, where he talks openly about his life in the Mafia, his regrets, and his fall from grace. He's dubbed himself the Don of social media, and it's clear that even now, he craves the spotlight. But for all his attempts to rewrite his story, one thing remains: Sammy Gravano will always be the man who broke the Mafia's most sacred rule. And for that, the underworld will never forgive him. The legacy of Sammy Gravano. A lesson in betrayal. In the end, Sammy Gravano's life is a cautionary tale about the cost of betrayal. In the Mafia, loyalty is everything. But when loyalty is betrayed, the consequences are catastrophic. Gravano's decision to turn on the Gambino family didn't just destroy one of the most powerful crime organizations in history, it destroyed the man himself. Today, Gravano may have found a way to stay relevant, but he's a man haunted by his past. No matter how many podcasts he hosts or how many interviews he gives, he will always be remembered as the Mafia's most infamous rat. And for a man who once ruled the streets of New York, that's a fate far worse than death.